Hi everyone, Wizarding Journey here, and today I'm going to show you how I made the dress for my Marnie cosplay from Pokemon Sword and Shield. This is going to be the first in a series of videos of the process of my creating of my Marnie cosplay. Each piece of her outfit took a long while, so that's why I'm making multiple videos to sum up everything. It would be too hard to sum up everything in one video and still be helpful to someone who wants to create the cosplay themselves. So first I started off with 6 feet of this dusty pink fabric. It ended up being way too much, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough fabric just in case I cut something wrong. Plus the fabric itself wasn't that expensive because I got it at the fabric district, so that was all good. For all the pieces I added a lot of seam allowance to make sure that none of the pieces were going to be too short or too tight. Make sure, especially for the skirt part, to add a lot of seam allowance for the scallop edges since we will be flipping it, and a big chunk of that fabric will be used to create the scalloped edge. I cut out 2 of the skirt pieces first, making sure the straight edge of the pattern shown here on the edge of the fabric, and that fabric is folded over, so you're gonna have a larger piece. I only had a rough sketch of the pattern that I made since it was my first time really making my own pattern for a cosplay. Before I used patterns from the store and just Frankenstein them together, but this one time it was all my own. I took some dresses from my closet and looked at how they were constructed and made my own, and that's why I only have the rough sketch in the video, since it is my first time making a pattern and I didn't really know how to make it digital and make it still fit the exact measurements that I had, and plus I don't know how to make different sizes for each, so I just made this specific pattern for myself. So I hope the rough sketch kind of gives you an idea what kind of pieces you would need for this cosplay. For the top of the dress, you want to cut out 4 pieces of each of the 2 parts for the front of the dress, making sure that 2 of them are facing one direction and then 2 of them are facing in a different direction. I also cut 2 larger strips. Those are going to be used for the back and the inside of the back. And then I also cut 2 pieces of the skinny strips, which are going to be for the straps for the dress. For the top part of the dress, I also cut out the pieces out of interfacing, which makes it more stiffer and able to hold its shape better. Now that we have all pieces cut out, let's get to the sewing part of this video. Started off with a zigzag stitch along the waist part of the dress to make sure that it would not fray. Next I sewed with a 3/8 seam allowance along the edge of the skirt, sewing the 2 parts of the skirt along together with the right sides facing each other. I also added a zigzag stitch along the edge where the seam allowance was to secure it. For the straps, I just folded the strap in half and sewed a straight line with 3/8 seam allowance and then turned them right side out. This might be a bit difficult, I had a hard time, but with the wooden dowel I used, it helped me a lot to flip the fabric over. Before sewing, you have to iron the interfacing according to the instructions. It really depends what kind of interfacing you were using. Some have specific instructions, others just say iron it on top. And you want to iron this onto the inside layer of each of the top pieces. Once that is done, we can proceed to sewing the top together. I used my dress form to make sure that the top would fit me snugly, but you can pin it together and just adjust it afterwards with taking more fabric in and stuff like that. Or you can ask someone to help you pin it to yourself and then sew it according to your measurements that way. First, you will have to sew together the two middle pieces of the top first, and then attach the side panels. Then sew the back piece onto one side of the top with a 3/8 seam allowance for all seams. Repeat this step twice since we need one part for the outside and one part for the inside layer of the top. Once both pieces are sewn, sew the inside and the outside piece together, putting them right sides together. I also added a 3/8 seam allowance for this one as well. Just everything in this video has a 3/8 seam allowance. That's usually how I sew my clothing or cosplay. So yeah. Once that was done, I cut in notches where the sweetheart neckline was to give it a nicer curve. And you would usually do this along the seam allowance that you left yourself, and don't cut into the seam that you just created. Just cut along it to make little notches so that it will fold over more easy. Now you can add the straps when sewing the outside and the inside piece together for the top, but I actually sewed it together and then seam ripped it on the parts where I actually wanted the straps to just make it easier for myself and see how I like the placement of those straps. And I crossed the straps in the back because I thought that might be how Marnie has her dress, since we can't really see if she has straps on her dress and how it looks from the back since she's wearing her jacket. And before cutting the straps or sewing them onto it, make sure they're the right size for you to avoid any further frustrations in the future with taking it all apart, taking in the strap, redoing a strap and stuff like that. And now I'm pinning the skirt part to the dress, to the top part, and make sure to leave one side open, the side that you also left open for the top, because we're going to add a zipper later in here. Again, I sewed it shut with a 3/8 seam allowance and then added a zigzag stitch along again for safety measures. And next I measured down how far I wanted the zipper. I'm still pretty new to sewing zippers and always have to look up videos when sewing zippers. I'll leave a link to the tutorial that I watched when sewing zippers, since I don't feel confident yet telling you guys how I did that. And I think the person who I watched did a really good job explaining how to sew a zipper. And once the zipper was in place, I sewed the rest of the skirt shut from the bottom up to the top where the zipper was. Next step was adding the scalloped edges. I had a hard time with it, but in the end I think it turned out pretty good for my first time attempting scalloped edges. So first thing I did was add a zigzag stitch around the bottom of the skirt. Next, I hemmed the bottom of the skirt with a straight stitch across. And I just folded it up. I didn't tuck the fabric in to hide that raw edge because I'm going to have to flip the fabric anyway for the scalloped edge, so it will be hidden anyway in the end. Next thing I did was measure out the size of the scallop I wanted and then drew it onto a piece of cardstock so that I could chase that pattern over and over again onto the fabric. Make sure that when measuring the size of your scallops to keep in mind the size of the skirt on the bottom, so that you can calculate how many scallops would exactly fit around the base of the skirt. Have the skirt right side out and then fold the hem of the fabric to the outside. Make sure you move the fabric so far up that you will be able to place the stencil that you just created of your scallop all the way onto the fabric with a bit of seam allowance. Once that pattern is all drawn onto the skirt, sew the fabric together, making sure that it is right sides together. Sew along the pattern that you just drew onto the skirt, making sure that with each new scallop, the beginning, you place the needle down and move the foot so that it's facing the right direction so that you get a crisp, new, nicely looking scallop. Along the pattern that you just created, you're going to cut off the excess fabric and leave a little bit of seam allowance. There you're then going to cut in little notches so that it can have better rounded edges again. Once that is done, flip the fabric right side out, and what I did was get it's a sort of sewing tape that when you iron it onto the fabric, it adheres the two pieces of fabric together, creating an invisible hem because I didn't want to have a hemline dividing the scallops from the rest of the skirt. If my instructions on how I sewed the scallop edges weren't very clear, I'm also including the video I watched when doing this cosplay in the description below. She also did a fantastic job explaining how to create these great looking scalloped edges. One of the last things I did was draw the markings of the bottom of the dress with water-soluble marker first, and then with acrylic paint and a little bit of fabric solution, I mixed those together and painted those shapes in. Now, a lot of people actually cut holes out of these shapes, but I wasn't sure if it was just a pattern on the dress or if it was her skin showing through, so I just decided to make the little shapes out of paint and make it a pattern rather than the holes because I was too lazy to actually go through the work of making them little cutouts. Now the last thing I did was put the belt on for the dress. For that I got ribbons and sewed them to the side seams of the dress, and for the side where the zipper is, make sure not to cross over the zipper or else you won't be able to use it. And that's it. Hopefully this video was helpful for you creating your own Marnie cosplay. The next part will be creating the jacket most likely, and probably will be posted next month if I have the time to edit everything. And there will also be a separate video on all the accessories that I created, like the shoes. I also made a Morpeko, also her necklace. Maybe her wig. I have to redo it, so I might film that process. So if you want to see those videos, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell to make sure you get the notifications when I will post my next video. If you like this video, a like would definitely be appreciated. Hope to see you in my next video. Bye!